Let me introduce now Catherine Malabou. She's a professor of philosophy at the Center for Research in Modern European Philosophy at Kingston University, London, and in the departments of Comparative Literature and European Languages and Studies at the University of California, Irvine. Her last books include Before Tomorrow, Epigenesis and Rationality, published in 2016, Morphing Intelligence from IQ to AI, published in 2018, and Le Plaisir effacé, Clitoris and pensée, edited by Rivages in 2020.
Thank you very much for your invitation. So I will present a talk called Disappointment in the Uncanny Valley. I will show some images, so I hope it works. So again, my talk is called Disappointment in the Uncanny Valley. The Uncanny Valley, I will explain what this image means in a moment, takes us into the world of robots, particularly realistic robots like those engineered by Ishiguro or by David Hanson from Hanson Robotics, creator of Sophia or of Philip K. Dick's Avatar. The major issue today is to know whether artificial intelligence systems should be incarnated in those realistic humanoid robots, or if the robot should not resemble human beings. In this presentation, I will ask myself if digital PTSD is susceptible to be caused by artificial relationships with uncanny robotic persons. So why exactly is robotic uncanniness? What type of trauma is it susceptible to generate? And are there ways to deal with it? So first, a few words about the expression Uncanny Valley. So the Uncanny Valley is the image you're seeing at the moment. This notion was invented by the robotics professor Masahiro Mori, and in Japanese, it is said Uncanny Valley, Bukimi no Tani Gensho, and this was invented in 1970. The term was first translated as Uncanny Valley in English by J.J. Rivages, who wrote a book called Robots, Fact, Fiction, and Prediction. And he chose that translation, Uncanny Valley, thus forging a link to Freud's 1909 essay called The Uncanny, in German, Das Unheimliche. Mori's original hypothesis states that as the appearance of a robot is made more human, some observers' emotional response to the robot becomes increasingly positive and empathetic until it reaches a point beyond which the response quickly becomes strong revulsion. In a first moment, I will develop on the Uncanny Valley and examine in a second moment the challenging of this notion by David Hanson. So here you have the valley. The deeper we go at the bottom of the valley, the easier the relationship with the robots is, or the relationships are. And when the relationship becomes too uncanny, we are going out of the valley. So I will explain why at the end of the valley, at the bottom, we have the zombie. But the theory is that there is a point, as I just said, of resemblance that is okay, that is not creating revulsion, resemblance between the human and the robot. But when this resemblance is too resembling, so we're going out of the valley because the confrontation with the robot is too uncanny. So the valley designates a zone going from the most familiar to the most unsettling, and it is called a valley because, as you see, it is a curve. The deeper we go, the less uncanny, and the upper we go, the more uncanny. Mori's question is, can robots look human without being frightening? Is there a way of having resembling robots, human resembling robots, and stay at the bottom of the valley. In his view, it is not possible. And the problem is all the more urgent when it comes to social robots, that is, robots that are able to speak, to use computer vision, who are doing animated gestures to socially engage people. So as we know, these robots and their constituent technologies are evolving at a rapid pace due to continuous advances in hardware performance. So in order to avoid creating traumatic effect with these robots, Mori argues that it would be less uncanny and we could stay at the bottom of the valley if we were creating non-human looking robots. So please, Julia, can you show picture 2? So this is Leonardo, a very, very intelligent robot that is, of course, used for children, but not only. It can have a conversation, it can speak to people, even, well, people of all ages. And Leonardo is not uncanny because, as you see, he has no resemblance with a human being. Or we have, Julia, picture 3. We have Neo. This is the last creation in Europe of a domestic robot that you can buy. It is now on sale, and it does a certain number of tasks in the house. And it has captors which measure temperature, that can look at who is ringing the bell outside, etc. So Neo is said to be friendly, and with him, it is possible to remain at the bottom of the valley. Why that? Because it's easy to understand that type of robots are not traumatic, because we feel more comfortable in front of overtly artificial robots. This is the argument of Mori. So strangely enough, zombies that we saw at the bottom of the valley are also said to be not uncanny. Why that? It is because the zombie, even if frightening, is not humanoid enough to be immediately perceived as a human. So a zombie is frightening, but it is not uncanny. And it is even possible to sympathize with a zombie. And we know that in the US, for example, there's a zombie day where everybody dresses like a zombie. And it is quite a friendly gathering. So strangely enough, a zombie can create empathy. On the contrary, human-like robots, very resembling robots, with a skin, with clothes, with an animated silicone face, like those designated by Ishiguro, as I said, are uncanny and traumatizing. The resemblance is sometimes not perfect, but sometimes it is perfect. And for example, Ishiguro has tried to create faces as exactly as possible. And he has improved a technology of silicone elastomers and hydraulic pneumatic actuators that really simulate the human face. So I will show you some of Ishiguro's creepy faces. This is how we call them, creepy faces. So you will see some of them are resembling, some of them are not that resembling. And in this gamut, you have the difference between uncanny and not uncanny. So Julia will look at so this is one of the creepy faces. So you see it's not totally resembling. So this, according to Mori, is paradoxically less uncanny than the other ones. So please, Julia, we'll see. So this one, which is much more resembling, and we'll see. Yes, so this one is also very interesting. This is the actual Ishiguro, and this is the robot, or maybe it's the other way around. We don't know exactly, even if we can guess a little bit. And you see that in that case, we are really up the Uncanny Valley because, and I saw pictures of the entire bodies, and it is amazing. From afar, you really cannot distinguish between Ishiguro and his copy. So Mori also argues that prostheses, hand prostheses, for example, are also uncanny. Next picture, please. So you see, so this is a very resembling hand prosthesis. It is an actual prosthesis. And Mori argues that this also creates a kind of traumatic effect. So at the end of his book, Mori argues that, in fact, there's no way, as I said, to really reach the perfect balance of resemblance, robotic resemblance, because it will always, in a way or another, create the uncanny effect. So that's why a robot should always be either animal or non-animated, like nobody, like Neo. I would like to develop a little bit about uncanniness. As I said in the beginning, it is a reference to Freud, to the article, The Uncanny. Freud, in his article, says that all automata, so he was not talking about robots at the time because they didn't have, of course, in the beginning of the 20th century, there was no human-like robots. So Freud talks about automata, and he says that all automata blur the frontiers between the animate and the inanimate, between the living and the dead, and raise, I quote, raise doubt as to whether an apparently inanimate object might not perhaps be inanimated. The fear that we have, of course, in front of the resembling robot, is that all of a sudden they start living and blur the frontier between life and death. Freud gives a few examples: impressions made on us by waxwork figures, ingeniously constructed dolls, automata, and also, just as Mori, severed limbs, severed head, a hand detached from the arm, feet that dance by themselves. All of these have something highly uncanny about them. So we find again the idea that when we reach the high point of resemblance, the uncanny emerges. So why do we have this traumatic effect, to go back to our robots, with human resembling robots? Because a very resembling robot is immediately apprehended as a human being that cannot act in a normal way, like paralyzed people, mentally or psychically disabled people. We immediately feel that there is something, let's say, wrong, if that's the right term. We feel that this robot has some kind of disability. We do as if it had some kind of disability. But even more, the emotional rejection is all the more strong that there are no social rules that would codify our reactions in front of a robot. We know more or less how to behave in front of a sick person, disabled or paralyzed. We've been educated in that way. But in front of a robot, we don't have any norms, we don't have any guide. So in fact, the traumatic effect comes from the fact that we don't know what to do. So the defenders of the Uncanny Valley theory also define it for this reason as a no man's land in the literal sense of the expression. So we are faced with the paradox of human-like robots that are at the same time nobody. It's a no man's land. We don't know how to react, and this is what causes the trauma. In another article, Mori says, perhaps I was too radical when I said that we had to make robots looking like animals, furry animals, or playful robots. We might imagine that another possibility would be the Buddha robot. And I want to show you the next picture, Julia, please. No, it's not this one. Sorry, no, not at all. No, it's not. Yes, yeah. So this is the Buddha robot that Mori thinks is acceptable. It's human-like, more or less, but not resembling at all. And it has this religious, of course, content that blocks the feeling of the uncanny. So, you know, Julia will show and this is another Buddha. So clearly it's a robot. So the human resemblance is very low. And there's this, once again, religious atmosphere that blocks the uncanny. So this was the first part of this presentation, like all the arguments against the fact of creating human-like robots. In another article, David Hanson, this time, who is the current most powerful robot engineer, David Hanson recently challenged the theory of the Uncanny Valley, affirming that, on the contrary, robots have to look human as possible. His company is the designer of Sophia, who was the first made citizen robot in the world by Saudi Arabia. And if you have ever seen Sophia, she's a speaking robot. She has face expressions, and Philip K. Dick's avatar as well. They are amazingly resembling. So Hanson argued in favor of human likeliness. And he wrote an article, and this is from Ron Muke, The Sculpture. I will tell a few words in a moment. In an article called Upending the Uncanny Valley, Hanson and his colleagues do acknowledge the existence of the uncanny, but say that after all, it is not unpleasant and not opposed to attractivity. Besides, the uncanny effect is a major effect in art in general and is far from producing discomfort. So he takes the example of the work of Ron Muke, a sculptor who at one time worked in Hanson Animatronics shop. His figure, while not animated, are extremely realistic in many aspects, but are distorted in others. So they are both very resembling and not resembling. The figures are much too large or small, overly expressive, or otherwise surreal. And Hanson declares the effect can be unsettling indeed, but public reaction seems generally to be that of awe and wonder, not derision or rejection. So please, Julia, can we see the two others? So this is another face by Ron Muke. And we can see, yes, this is a baby. So you see what is interesting in Muke's work is, once again, you can see that it is extremely resembling and at the same time, not totally traumatizing because of the distortion. So it's unsettling, it's uncomfortable, but not really uncanny. So Hanson argues in favor of that type of robot. He says we should develop robots that look like Muke's sculptures. So I quote Hanson again. He says, if people are indeed more sensitive to realistic depictions, at the same time, there is no valid. We then need a new name and a new framework. We have to build strange robots, but not frightening robots, as no valley is inherent. Anthropomorphic depictions can be either disturbing or appealing at every level of abstraction or realism. People simply get more sensitive with increasing levels of realism. In future work, it will be important to push the science of the art and the art of the science at their limit. In any case, this is the last sentence, the science, art, and technology of social robots will benefit from the removal of the artificial prescription of the Uncanny Valley. So clearly, this long sentence, what does it say? It says, yes, we have to attain a level of artificial humanity that is both, once again, extremely realistic, but so realistic that at some point it is not that uncanny, even if distressing or uncomfortable. Of course, this discussion, why is it important? Because, as we know, artificial relationships will be more and more developed. One day we'll have artificial friends, artificial lovers, perhaps. That's already the case in some way because of the, well, technological apparatus that we use all the time. But one day we might have to engage genuine relationships with robots. So it is very important to ask ourselves what is the best appearance they can have, what is the best feature, the best look they can have in order to be accepted as artificial without getting traumatic. And we understand that the discussion concerns the problem of the body mainly, body imitation, facial imitation, physical likeness, etc. But now we have a new problem which adds a supplementary degree of uncanniness, which is the part played by intelligence. So it's not only about the body, it's also about the mind, which is now also somewhere in the uncanny valley. It is very interesting to see that today, with artificial intelligence, the question of the uncanniness created by human-like intelligence and not only, again, physical appearance emerges. What effects does an artificial brain, an artificial cognitive system, an artificial thinking, speaking device rise? What happens when the uncanniness is not only created by a physical appearance, but also by a spirit or an artificial mind? The essential difference between Mori's robots and Hansen robots today is that the latter are said to be intelligent. Sophia, K-Dick, they speak, they improvise in their answers. So today I will argue that the uncanniness has moved from the body to the mind. And I think that the potential digital PTSD or robotic PTSD pertains to intelligence. I think this is what makes people feel uncomfortable today. I think people are less frightened because we are getting used to them in a certain sense. We are less, we feel less unsettled by human resembling robots now than by intelligent robots, because the capacity to simulate human intelligence is raising a new challenge. It is the robotic mind that has become animated. And all questions about human robots competition, about the threat robots represent today, threats on management, government, responsibility, labor, pertain in a way or another to this psychic dimension that no one is actually questioning, which is the uncanny valley of intelligence and the psychic effect of automatic intelligence, brain simulation, artificial imagination, artificial creativity, artificial capacity to improvise, and mostly artificial sensibility and affectivity. Because as we know, robots are becoming more and more able to simulate emotions and affects today. So the question is to know whether artificial intelligence creates a new effect of death within life, a new zombie effect, or on the contrary, a new form of unbearable uncanniness. So what exactly is the difference between an artificial limb, like look, the hand prosthesis that we saw a moment ago, and an artificial mind or an artificial brain? These are open questions. According to Freud, uncanniness pertains to the revelation that, I quote, everything that was intended to remain secret, hidden, has come into the open, So Freud says what is uncanny is that all of a sudden something that should have remained hidden appears in the open. And initially, he says what had to remain hidden was the soul. That was the soul. That's why the soul was considered to be within the body. So the uncanniness appears when the soul, in a certain sense, gets out of the body. And this is what we call an automat, which means that the animation comes out of life itself and becomes mechanical. So the fantasy of a mind which is outside of itself was already described by Freud, and the effect of this automatic mind is all the more urgent today, that it really exists as a very resembling or extremely troubling, there's an extremely troubling resemblance between the human soul, let's say, and the artificial soul. So what is artificial intelligence really? Is it the soul that has been pushed outside of itself, or is it a dead intelligence? Is it fascinated? Is it disenchanting? Is it comforting? Is it traumatic? I think that these questions are extremely urgent today. They are our questions, if I may say so. So I would like to conclude this intervention by referring to the famous film by Spike Jonze. It was made in 2013. It is a sci-fi film called Her. So in this film, Theodore Twombly, played by Joaquin Phoenix, is living in Los Angeles in 2025, and he's desperate after his divorce, and he sets up a new OS1 operating system, which is an artificial intelligence system, which he gives a feminine voice, and this voice is played by Scarlett Johansson. Programmed to adapt and evolve, this system chooses the name Samantha for itself. Soon, man and machine develop a love relationship. But in the end, Samantha eventually leaves Theodore, admitting that throughout their relationship, she had many other affairs. So Samantha is the plastic computer par excellence. She has no bodily existence, but she's endowed with intelligence, and she's so able to simulate human intelligence that we forget that she doesn't have a body. She's capable of adapting to the personality of Theodore. She is able to modulate her voice and feelings. She responds, she makes love, and she participates in all the events of the life of her partner. So we forget that she's a robot. We forget that she doesn't have a body. And Theodore is totally fascinated by her, and he's victim of her charm. So she only appears in her true light at the end of the film. She appears as what she is, which is a technological gadget with no identity, a cybernetic whore, a total disappointment. And Theodore is left with the impossibility to distinguish living plasticity from its artificial version. So I think the question is open when it comes to trauma and robots and artificial intelligence. The question is open of what is the limit between biological plasticity, natural bodies, and technological flexibility. Thank you very much.
The notion of Uncanny Valley was developed by robotician Masahiro Mori to characterize the relationship between the degree of a robot's resemblance to a human being and the emotional response to it. The concept of the Uncanny Valley suggests that humanoids, which appear almost but not exactly like real human beings, cause uncanny feelings of revulsion in observers. Valley denotes a deep in the human observer's affinity for the replica. The more resemblant the replica, the stronger the feeling of uncanniness. In this presentation, Malabou asked if digital PTSD is susceptible to be caused by artificial relationships with uncanny robotic lovers and friends, and the disappointment generated by the solitude, unfulfillment caused by a type of alterity that remains alien to any registered definition of alterity. And otherness to otherness. Why exactly is robotic uncanniness? What type of traumas does it generate? And are there ways to deal with it?